Hey, this is Mike Lindsay, and we're talking about the 2020 Honda CRF450R Works Edition and the 2020 Honda CRF450R. Now, these bikes just got released for technical info and features from Honda. And let's see, 2020 is year 4 of this generation of motorcycle, which is what Honda usually sticks to when they build bikes. They usually go in 4. So you had your 9 to 12, 13 to 16, and then this one would be 17 to 20. So just judging based off of how they've gone about in the past, you would start to think this is probably going to be the last bike in this generation of 450s. But then again, it has been by far one of the most successful ones they've done since probably the original the really most popular 05 to 08 model. So maybe they'll extend it out another year. But so let's talk about what's up with these 2020s. Works Edition is back. I know the crew I talked to, American Honda, was super stoked on sales of it last year. They were really happy with how it's received. Kind of coming off the heels of how KTM had done special editions with their factory edition. Honda came in, I feel like they took a little extra step above that. You had the typical, let's make it look like the race team bike. In this case, it came with HRC graphics, had Ken Roxon's number on it, a couple of anodized bits here and there. But then a couple little bit bigger ones for them is a hand-ported head spec that's a little bit different than the standard bike. Its own ignition mapping, a set of Yoshimura slip-ons. They're titanium. And it also had upgraded rims and just a few, and then also actually the coated forks. So I kind of took it and set it a little bit higher up, a little bit notch above those the factory edition and Rockstar edition that KTM and Husky have been doing. And based off that first year, Honda's decided to actually step it up just a little bit more. Last year it came with basically a production head pipe, but for 2020 they've updated it to the Yoshimura, the titanium one that Yosh actually made for the Works Edition. So it's not the same as the system you would go out and buy for just a CRF450R. It's a different head pipe, mostly because the Works Edition last year used a can and mid-pipe layout that had to fit a stock header. So it had a different mid-pipe design and size than the one they used for their full system. So in turn, they made an accessory head pipe that would only work with those mid-pipes that they sold to people that had Works Edition bikes. I think you actually had to provide your VIN number when you purchased it. It's pretty unique, different. It's got a lot different split area. It splits earlier. It's just has a little bit more of a unique look to it. So they've went ahead and brought that on standard. So guys that pick these up don't have to go buy it later. So it comes with a complete titanium Yosh system. And then a couple little other things. They've updated the graphics and the plastic to look like this year's bike, so there's a lot more red involved. They've also added Renthal dual compound Kevlar grips. And then really that's kind of it for the Works Edition side. That is what is unique to the Works Edition. The updated head pipe, the throttle, the upgraded graphics, red plastic, and the grips, and then kind of everything else is a carryover from the year before. The coated suspension, the hand-ported head, its own unique ECU settings. But then where it becomes a little bit, here's where it starts to cross over with what's new with the CRF450R, which I'll cover after this. CRF450s in general this year are getting all new Honda Selectable torque control with 3 levels of intervention. And basically what they're saying is they now have another map switch up on the handlebars. So you still have your standard map switch, which has your 3 levels, your soft, your standard, and your aggressive for the general mapping. But then they have HSTC, Selectable Torque Control, which is basically like the traction control or the I think it's S-Hack, just the systems we've seen between the Kawi, the Suzuki, the KTM, the Husky over the years. It's basically a combination of sensors that senses RPM spikes, whether it's based off a crank-based sensor, whatever. It senses crank-based spikes, and from there, it starts to reduce power based off throttle position. If you're at 50% or less throttle opening and it senses an RPM spike, it starts to back off some of the settings in the mapping to basically back off the power until that comes under control, that RPM spike. So that's their way of kind of producing traction control on a dirt bike, considering wheel-based sensor systems like you see in cars and road racing don't really translate that well to moto. This HSTC system actually has 3 modes of its own operation. So you're going to have your handlebar switch, that's your kill switch with the little blue dot that does the map, and then next to it's going to be another switch that looks similar to their old kill switch, which will run the HSTC system across 3 different maps for 3 different, as I say, conditions. So probably same thing. We'll have one that has a very minor intervention, one with a medium, and one with a heavy intervention system. From there, the fork and shock settings have both been changed. They're trying to improve chassis balance and overall handling by their claim. The battery has also been dropped 28 millimeters in the rear. So they basically redesigned the battery tray and moved it farther down into the airbox, trying to take that extra weight of that battery and move it lower in the chassis, lower center of gravity. Stuff like this, they probably developed with the race team. Those guys pick up on little traits like this when you're able to change the weight positioning on the bike and how it makes everything handle. They've also switched out rear brake pad material for improved performance and increased durability. They've eliminated the low rear brake rotor guard, so a little plastic guard that usually covers the rear rotor, to improve heat dissipation and reduce weight. And that pretty much covers it for the Works Edition. Like I said, it still carries over its different cylinder head. It carries over its unique ECU settings from the standard 450R, which are meant to work with that head and the Yoshimura exhaust system. It also has launch control, which they added last year, and it has a shift sensor that has a dedicated ignition map for each gear. So gear 1 through 5 all has their own ignition mapping that is unique to this bike from the R. The other updates from last year was basically the mid-generation frame change, where they changed the back half of the frame to the swing arm, made it a bit more rigid, and basically just kind of changed the handling characteristic of the bike, changing the yaw, basically what they would consider the torsional stiffness and yaw stiffness, I believe. We wrote it for Shootout. A lot of guys commented on increased rear end feel, like less of a snap characteristic with the rear end, more control and feel of the rear end under steering, and it also changed a bit of the energy that was transferred to the front end. Kind of stoked to see him change the suspension settings a little bit, because that frame change last year, at least for me, made the bike actually a little more unstable, a little bit twitchier at high speeds. The front seemed to deflect a little more or react a little more to the surface. So hopefully these suspension changes they did kind of brought that in line, because the frame was definitely an upgrade in overall handling characteristic, but I thought there was a small negative to stability when they switched that. Front brake calipers, also the update from last year, has a 30mm and 27mm piston instead of 2 the same size. That's the same way HRC actually does their brake caliper. The leading edge piston is smaller, with the piston that's farther into the travel of the rotor bigger. It basically applies more what they feel like is an even pressure with the brake pad. If you have 2 the same piston sizes, it tends to push the first area of the pad in enough, it catches the rotor and starts to kind of wear at an angle. If you've ever taken your pads out and they're angled, supposedly switching to this piston design kind of helps even out that pressure. Definitely for me, the brakes were a big upgrade on last year's bike. Really kind of interesting one too is they also place in this PR available only through Honda dealers, Dunlop Geomax MX3S tires. So they're basically saying they're going to stick with MX3S, and you can actually get them through a Honda dealership. I don't know how much availability there's going to be of that, because I thought I'd heard that Dunlop has claimed that that tire is going to be an OEM spec only now, and I don't know how many of them they're realistically making at this point as they've moved into the 33 product. And I think you'll see a little bit of a split this year between all the OEMs on which one they decide to basically place their bikes with. Some are going to go with the new tire, some are going to go with the old, some that's based off contracts from a year or two ago, some that's based off rider feedback. Different reasons, different folks, different strokes. We'll see for tires there. Now, moving over to the standard 2020 CRF450R, it does, like I said, this is a year 4 of 4 bike. The Works Edition is on year 2, but the overall generation of this 450 is year 4 of, I keep saying year 4 of 4 because typically that's what I'd see. Maybe they'll go to 5, but my guess would be there's a good chance this will be the last 450 we see of this generation before maybe a new generation of bike. So the upgrades it gets for 2020, like I said, it has the Honda Selectable torque control that we're seeing on the Works Edition. That is on the standard bike as well. So you have your standard maps and you have your traction control or torque control style maps. Handlebar mount switch allows selection between 3 modes depending on conditions and rider preference. So now when you start your Honda, you have your options of 3 different maps and 3 different torque control maps. So you can pick any combination. So something for guys to mess around with. Battery position, lower 28 millimeters. It has that lower airbox placement. Revised internal fork and shock settings for improved chassis bounce overall handling. Basically, it in the Works Edition should have the exact same suspension setting outside of the coatings that is found on the Works Edition. Same thing for rear brake upgrades. Rear brake pad material has been improved. They eliminated that rear brake guard, and they've also updated the graphics, kind of went with a bit more red overall on the bike. And similar to the Works Edition, MX3S is the standard tire. I've also, of course, if you've been watching the video, at the end of each bike, you'll see the full features benefit PR that Honda put out, and you're also going to see the specification list for each bike, so you can check out the weights, the MSRP, all the goodies just about the tech info for these bikes in particular. You'll see a couple small differences in the Works Edition to the standard bike, mostly in price and weight for each bike, and you can learn more about it. Also have one of these videos up on the 2020 CRF450R. There's actually a decent amount of changes there as they're entering year 3, kind of a mid-generation change for that bike. Frames, more engine upgrades, so you can check out that video, and I'm also going to be putting up a few more about the range. A lot of the other bikes, like the RX, the X, and the L, are kind of a little bit B&G this year, especially in the X and the L because they were just introduced late last year. But there's a few more up if you want to check on them. Also hit subscribe if you like this kind of tech info. I'll be putting these out for each one of the bike models in off-road as a release this year before actually going to the test themselves as soon as they have them. In this case, Honda, probably early August is when we would test these bikes. That seems about to be their average right now for a bike that isn't drastically overhauled. If they do a big overhaul year, it's a little bit late, but with a standard bike, I think we should be testing these bikes by August. So check back for those videos as well.